Like I say, we have a lot of important and exciting things to discuss, but one of the most exciting things is part 2 of 3 of our ongoing series on diversity, equity, inclusion in local politics. And we're going to throw that over to Martina Meyer, our first vice chair, to introduce our panelists for this program.
All right. Thanks, Patrick. So tonight we are going to be hearing from 2 of our city councilors, City Councilor Nadia Hasan, who is our city councilor in Beaverton. And we are also going to hear from Angeles Godinez, who is a city councilor in Cornelius. And it's going to be a little bit of I'll ask a question and they will answer. But the theme tonight is to understand a lot of what we may not realize is going on when women of color run for office. Just a lot of the things we don't know about what they need to learn and go through. And one of the things that I would like to call out before they formally start is both of these women come from different cultural backgrounds, and it's just always good to remember that these are still the stories of individual women. So sometimes in our attempt to be diverse, we will use big lumping categories like BIPOC, and sometimes that can actually make us lose a sense for the individuality as well, the individual cultures and what they encounter, as well as the individual people and what they encounter. So the goal of this series is to balance both of those things, to balance our understanding of what different cultural groups go through and different struggles, but also see the humanity and the individuality of these women. So I hope that is a good introduction. And so Nadia and Angeles, do you want to just say hi really quick and give a quick introduction?
Sure, I'll jump in. My name is Nadia Hasan. Fun fact, for 38 years, I called myself Hasan because that's how I thought I pronounced it until it's okay. Well, until I was corrected by my own family and decided that I should try to start saying my last name right. So it's been a struggle for me and a lot of folks around me because I used to be a high school teacher, so everyone calls me Hasan. I serve on city council here in the city of Beaverton. I've got 3 kiddos, work in human resources, and I'm a former high school teacher. So super excited to be here to share my experiences. Thank you for listening.
Hi everyone, my name is Angeles. I'm an education director for Centro Cultural, which is a local nonprofit here in Washington County. So I build meaningful partnerships for change and really develop culturally specific programming for our Latinx community, and very happy to be here. So thank you for having us.
Awesome, thank you both. All right, so first question. What inspired you to run? Would you like to go first, Angeles?
Sure. So I was born in Forest Grove and I've lived in Cornelius all my life. So really the only time that I left was when I went to college in Maryland. And I'm sure many of you that know me have heard me say this before, but I really never expected to go into politics. But for me, it felt like I was constantly waiting for a political knight in shining armor to come and fight for everything I believed in. And instead I graduated college in 2017, and Trump was living in the White House, and suddenly it felt like no one was listening to logic or facts anymore. And I've watched Cornelius grow from about 6,000 people to over 13,000. And with that, I've also watched the expansion of Silicon Valley, add to the rise of gentrification. And although the population is growing, many residents have been driven out because as rent prices increase and urban growth lines expand, developers buy out empty land to fill the housing demand. And Cornelius is a small town, and so there's only so much that they can do, especially with not enough equitable housing available. So families were forced to move away despite keeping their local jobs in pursuit to address our community housing issues. That's why I became a Cornelius planning commissioner. But when the Trump administration began to separate children from their parents and put them into cages, I knew that I couldn't go any longer without being more politically involved. And, my mother, while pregnant with me, was actually arrested by ICE during a raid. And at that time, my brother was about 2 years old. And I cannot imagine growing up and not knowing my brother because, he would have been all alone here in America and I would have grown up in Mexico. And long story short, the policies in place under the administration at that time did not actually allow my mom a path to citizenship, which is something that would be so unheard of right now. And it really breaks my heart to see the reality that so many of our families are going through with no real action towards an immigration reform. You know, and to pile that up, growing up, I heard my family complain about decisions going on in the city that they weren't happy about. And they never knew that there was that they had a voice, and, you know, that there were systems out there in place for them to be able to use that voice to share their community concerns. But, you know, those are not systems that they're familiar with. And so all this to say that I got tired of hearing people talk the talk, and instead of walking the walk, and I decided to take on a role of accountability for my community. So
thank you. That's awesome and super inspiring. Nadia?
Yeah, so there's like a couple of different stories I could talk about, but I'll talk about maybe two specific ones. On 9/11, I was sleeping and I knew a guy that lived in New York who called me about what happened. And I remember in that moment, like the fear that I had, like, please don't be Muslims, or please don't be related to Muslims, or, you know, what's going to happen, right? And feeling like every time something happened that I had to put out a statement like, oh, this isn't a reflection of, you know, of Muslims, or, you know, it was this weird place. And for several years, I was on a list that required me to show additional identification when I traveled. And I accepted that as the norm of living in this country, despite being born and raised in this country. So born and raised in this country, traveled a ton for my work at the time between New York, LA, Chicago, and always had to show up about an hour earlier just to show that identification. So that's story one. And then story two, similar to Angeles in 2017, you know, we saw some real fear in the White House. And as a high school teacher in a school of mostly of a high population of undocumented students, sat in a room with teachers and said, what would we do if ICE came here? And we all agreed that we would put the school in lockdown. And then they agreed that I shouldn't put the school in lockdown because it's more of a danger for me to do it. And so those experiences, amongst many others, inspired me to run. But I think what's most interesting is when someone called me and said, do you know anyone who wants to run in the city of Beaverton? I didn't think of myself. They said, we really want a person of color. And I proceeded to name people that I knew that lived in the city, because I just didn't see that for myself until someone called me and said, why not you? And that was really, really powerful for me. And it's one of the main reasons I'm here today. And then last, I'm a mom of 3 kids. I have a 10, 7, and a 2-year-old. To have an unvaccinated kid in this time, to have kids waiting for vaccines in this time, it's really hard and it's really scary. So super excited to be able to represent different communities that I get to represent.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. Nadia, why don't you go next on this one? What barriers did you face when running for office?
Yeah, so I get to have a couple different identities. So my dad's from India, so I'm Indian. My mom's from Pakistan, so I'm Pakistani. And then I was born and raised here in the United States. And I also identify as Muslim. So for the Indian folks in my family, I've never been Indian enough. For the Pakistani folks in my family, I've never been Pakistani enough. And for Muslim people, I'm not Muslim enough. And for American people, sometimes I must not be from here because I don't look like American. And so that like internal struggle of like who I am and how to navigate my community, which is Indian and Pakistani and Muslim and all of you, right? And my neighbors, has always been something really complicated. And it's like code switching, like to become who I need to be for the people that I'm around, whether it's being around specific people or different people and figuring out how to be comfortable. So I've lived that for my whole life, like learning how to code switch. I think that I was actually really privileged. I was laid off. So in COVID, I lost my job. And because I lost my job, I didn't have an income and I didn't have anything to do. And I genuinely believe that that gave me the privilege to run for office, fundraise, contact people, keep looking for a job. But I would not have been able to do any of what I did had I not had the privilege of losing my job. It was time that I had that some of our candidates that we've already that are running for office, to work full time, to have a family, to do all the things. I think that's a really big barrier that we need to talk about and just address. I think childcare is another big piece in terms of I'll never forget scrolling Facebook, watching my post. We had just sponsored an ad, and I was getting hate comments, anti-Muslim comments, and we were trying to hide them as soon as we got them. And I'm hiding, and I created a table so my daughter wouldn't, she was 1.5. She climbed over, went into the pantry and got her finger in a mouse trap because we were dealing with mice. And so it was just so she screamed, and I was like, oh my God. And I mean, I'm just trying to catch this troll and stop them from trolling my social media, saying stuff about me. And sometimes I would look these people up just to see where they lived. And some of them actually lived in Beaverton. And that was the hardest to know that people could hate me and not even know who I am, and that they take the time to go on my Facebook. And I think we paid $500 for a Facebook ad, right? This wasn't this isn't big money, so to get those messages for my daughter to get them out, I was just and I tried telling other people in my life to manage the social media so that I didn't have to do that, because that's a pretty big undertaking. But I think it was really important. And the last thing I'll say, and I'd love to hear from Angeles, is despite being born and raised here, for some people, it is hard to navigate what I call whiteness. There's a way to be professional. There's a way to talk. We show up on time, right? Weddings in Pakistan, say 9 p.m., they start at 10. It's not there are cultural norms that for some people are really hard to navigate and really different. And so I've had the privilege of working in corporate America and knowing how to be in quote unquote professionalism, and then step out of being who I am and being really comfortable. And I'm comfortable with that. But I think a lot of our other communities and especially some of our immigrants, they struggle to know how to navigate and code switch like that. And I think that's really important for us to be thinking about as we think about candidates that are out there. And as someone also noted, dual income versus partner income. I mean, I will say 100%, I've been in meetings since 3 p.m. And I had my full-time job today. I have a very supportive partner who is with 3 kids right now so that I can be here with you. I'm blessed.
Thank you, Nadia. You took all of my good points. So I'm just kidding. So I'll just say that, one of the biggest issues that I faced, and I know many others I've spoken to have had similar things, and that's understanding the actual process of running for office and what that looks like. Everything from deciding that you're going to run and filing the appropriate paperwork with the state and local office, to finding a campaign manager, endorsements, connecting with elected officials, connecting with your constituents. And that entire process can be extremely daunting. And I think the only reason I was able to really navigate it was because I took the time to look up resources online. And that's how I got connected to Emerge. And they were very useful. But even then, there's all of these external factors such as time, money, and support, a lot of those that Nadia mentioned. And I ran for office during 2020 when the pandemic was in full swing, and that really impacted my ability to connect with people in a way that I think we might normally do. And I saw myself, I saw those that were really experienced running for office also scrambling to figure it out. So it wasn't, it was all of us kind of just trying to navigate these systems. And I would also say that the hardest barrier for me emotionally has definitely been not having the support of my family. When I told them that I was thinking of running for city council, I first had to explain what that was. And, and then they asked why I wanted to get involved in something so dangerous. And because in their experiences in their home countries, they associate politicians with corruption or death. In their eyes, you either play the game or you die trying to make a change. And then when she read the newspaper and heard about the shooting in Portland during the Black Lives Matter protest this weekend, she was so scared. She literally sent me a message and was like, please think about what you're doing and stay safe, because it really scares her to see domestic terrorism brought on by a community that's really just trying to fight against racism, discrimination, and inequality. So I know she's not the only reason, she has more reasons and she's not the only one to distrust government, but not having that support is crucial, and those misunderstandings a lot. And I'm sure a lot of people have that, but those are definitely some of my bigger barriers.
Thank you. All right, last question. How can we as the Washington County Democrats support candidates navigating running for office, and specifically in communities of color or historically excluded communities? Do you want to go first, Angeles?
Sure. Connecting with candidates that are running and asking where they are in the process and what sort of help they need in terms of navigation can be very helpful, especially when it comes to making connections with current elected officials. I often found myself, when I would reach out to elected officials, I had so many who didn't even get back to me. And sometimes it actually felt like once I had sat down with them and was able to prove to them that I was useful, then that it felt those lines of communications were open, which, should then make me think about how difficult it must be for our community members to feel like they're being heard by their elected officials. And I think another way that our Washington County Democrats can support our BIPOC candidates are by really working with those grassroots organizations and local activists to really find those in the community who would be great advocates and just need help navigating the system or need that confidence boost to run for office. I'm sure many of us work with local nonprofits that are serving our communities, and we've seen their needs and their trauma on a regular basis, and it's difficult not to take that home with you. As we've talked about before, it takes a lot of money, a lot of time, experience to run for office. And if you don't have very much of either of those, it becomes nearly impossible unless you have the right connections. And so, I believe with your help and the outreach, we can bridge the gap and create the systems missing to make it easier for our marginalized communities to run for office. And, lastly, I'll just say, I think to really create working relationships between our BIPOC community and government, we really need to form partnerships with trusted community organizations and work with them to create committees really focused on supporting our historically excluded communities, made up of government officials, experts in the field, and community members, because this leads to equalized power dynamics and shared problem solving and really organizational transformation. So I think it's vital for us to work really closely with those elected peers to ensure that we're really supporting the needs of our community on both a local, county, state, and federal level. We need to make sure that we're creating real change. And as we've seen before, the potential for significant changes in numbers. And so I think in working with our Democratic Party and elected officials all over the state, we can really unify our communities by breaking down those systematic barriers that are affecting us as Oregonians on a daily basis. So.
Thank you.
So a couple things. I think the easiest one is just a check-in. And I'm just gonna give Ashley some praise. I, have seen, there's just been things that have happened to Muslims in whether they're in Portland, whether they're in Oregon, whether they're in the United States, whether they're in the world, right? And I'll post about it, I'll write about it. And it's just like a check-in, are you okay? Because we talk about current events, in India, Muslim girls are being banned from going to public school. This started last week. In France, Muslims are banned from participating in sports. This also happened this week. And so, what are the events that might be affecting our communities that we wouldn't know about? I chatted with someone. They talked about what's happening in Texas. There's legislation that's very hateful. And we forget sometimes to check in on the different people to see where they are. And then if it's not in our circle, we kind of forget it. And so finding ways to center voices that are not always your own and those of others. And also understand that there's some anti-immigrant colonizer stuff happening with our communities. And I'll give you an example. My parents believe that systemic racism is the price that they pay to live in this country. They're like, oh, it's okay that the officer, wasn't nice to me or, that that they flicked me off, right? Like my mom's like, I'm just gonna smile them away, you know, it's okay. And I challenge her and say, that's not the America that I want for myself. And so checking in, building trust, right? Because I might not feel comfortable telling you what I'm really feeling, and it might just be blanket, right? And then saying like, what is there something I can do? What can I do? Because I don't even know, like if you asked me today, like what you can do to like make me feel better around all the hate that I see around me, I don't know. I'm not sure I have an answer for that because it feels like all over for me. And so how do you check in with folks? So I think there's like two things. There's like the money, which is obviously donating to candidates. If we know that women of color make X amount of money to the dollar than white women, then that means that donation goes a little bit higher for that woman of color, in my opinion. So financially supporting, but really that emotional, mental check-in of like, what's going on? What can we be doing? What's on your radar? How can we be supportive? And I think, and I don't know how Angeles feels, but I'm so excited to be in the position that I am. I'm very blessed and I'm very thankful, but it feels really heavy sometimes. I'm not a monolith for all Muslims. I'm not a monolith for all Indians. I'm not a monolith for all Pakistanis. And so sometimes it's like, well, what do you think? And I was like, I don't know, what do folks think? If I centered myself, I wouldn't feel like a leader. And so like, what does it look like for us to center others and really check in with them and see how they're doing? I think y'all do really important work. I think it's also important to recognize like the economic disparities, generally speaking, right? Like folks who are retired, folks who have the capacity, folks who have the money, like those are very different things that make us all different. But we're all here today because we care about like what we want the future to be. And that I think is really important.
Thank you. We wanted to give people 2 or 3 minutes to ask questions. So if anybody wants to write anything in the chat, please go ahead and do that. And we'll try to answer questions for, let's say, 3 or 4 minutes. I'll give you guys a second. If you prefer to raise your hand and ask a question, that's fine too. Oh, Hector. Oh, he's saying thank you. Thanks, Hector. He's thanking you both for stepping up to the plate.
I'll say one other thing. I didn't know how to navigate this. I didn't know how to navigate politics. I didn't know how to navigate these conversations. And you have communities of color around you who don't even know what this meeting is, who don't even know what Washco Dems are. And so like meeting people where they are versus expecting them to know where they are. I'll be really honest with you, like Democrat, Republican, like culturally, it's not something that we talk about or do. It's just not like, it's just not for me anyways. And so knowing that some of us are there, we're like, we didn't even know we might have been like a registered N, for example. And I'm just hypothetically saying that this happened. Like there is a lot of opportunity for us to educate and like help people better understand how to navigate and what these things mean. Obviously we got more Ds in 2017, 2018, and we'll keep getting them. But for some people, even that is such a barrier to understanding. Oh, there's a question.
There is.
Angeles? Go ahead, Angeles, answer the question.
It's what is the biggest reward you are experiencing as you run and serve?
You know, this is kind of like a backhanded compliment, I would say, or not. So we were in a meeting, and I won't say who or what meeting because I don't want to give anyone out, but I was called the most radical because of certain things happening, and we're in a pandemic, and I just didn't want to do this one thing. But it also made me realize that if I hadn't been in that moment and I hadn't been speaking up, then that conversation wouldn't have occurred, and these thought processes would have just continued to be the same. And so to me, I think that's what keeps me going. And that's really what I think is the most rewarding, even when sometimes it feels like you do have all that weight on your shoulders, and maybe, you know, you are a little too radical, but I don't know. I think I'm fine.
Well, we know Angeles isn't radical. I think I would just say that, like, the one thing I feel really blessed for is that there is such a racial like a reckoning happening around this. I can't imagine, you know, what Chair Harrington or other leaders before us might have had to deal with when these things, which some of us, especially of color, like, knew these things happen. Like, I've known, right? Like in 2005, 2006, I regularly showed additional ID to travel. Like, that was just a norm in my life. So to be in office in this last year and to see this like strong, like, passion and commitment to social justice, like, I don't know if I could have done this 2 years ago and still stay positive. I'm a little nervous about 2022 elections, but I'm super thankful that I get to be a leader in this time, because people are prioritizing racial equity, gender equity, and things that we just didn't in the past. So thank you.
Thank you. I know we do have to move on to the rest of the meeting, so I appreciate the Central Committee being here and listening in. And I think the big takeaway I just hope everybody gets from this conversation is that, you know, we're all human beings navigating, but some of us are just not used to the systems and how they function. That's not only in politics, that even is for things like applying for a university when you're in junior high or high school. There's just so many things that I think when you come from your home-based culture, you take for granted as obvious. And it's not obvious to everyone. It's just not. And so if we can keep that in mind, I know we always say we have an open door here at the party, and I know we do. I know that's a sincere sentiment, like our doors are open, but that leaning in, you know, if you do participate in other organizations or you hear about other organizations, like actually taking the time, if you all could take a little time to meet other people and invite them, and not invite them like, oh, you should come to this thing, and not explain anything. Like, if you're going to take the time to invite somebody, help them understand how it works, that we do voting and why, you know, have them come in powerfully prepared so they know why they're coming and what they're coming to. I think those are just small things we can all do as Democrats. I know I saw that question come up, like, what can we do as Democrats? I think if that's an easy take home that you can just apply anywhere. Don't take for granted that people know stuff, and make sure people come powerfully prepared if you invite them, to know what to expect and how it works and why it would be of value to them, and like help them, shepherd them through the process so they actually can learn something and not have it be like, wow, what was that? I guess that's not for me. So I hear that a lot from people when they're unfamiliar with how all this works, is, well, that was not for me. And that's what we don't want. And I know we don't want that. So that's my 2 cents. I hope that helps. And I want to thank Nadia. I know she's had a long day today, and so is Angeles. Thank you both for being here and sharing. And I guess I will turn it back over to you, Patrick.
Thank you. Well, I add my appreciation to our wonderful panelists. It's a pleasure to hear from just a little bit of your stories.